Okay, good evening, or it's evening for me, I should say. You didn't need to know that. Um, so I'm going to start this one. This is going to be a video looking at one of the two poems that I'm asking you to read for today. The first one is James Tate's The Lost Pilot, and the second one is Robert Creeley's For Love. And we're going to look at the poem again through line and imagery. If you look at today's syllabus, it talks about the videos we're making will deal with Tate and Creeley, close reading, student responses, line imagery, and citations of validity. And we'll talk a little bit about today, at least, the Creeley, the close reading, line and image, and kind of touch on student responses. And I'll have a separate video for the citations and validity that I'll put up in just a little bit. But I'm going to look at Creeley more so than Tate, because I want to ask some questions about Tate on the prompt, having hopefully where you can watch and listen to what I'm doing now and apply some of those skills to the other poems. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about the Tate poem, but I'm happy to later if you would like me to. Same thing goes with talking about the Gwendolyn Brooks poem or the William Stafford poem. I can make more videos where I continue to discuss those sort of in completion, but I also want to make sure that we're covering material the best way that we can, which is, complicated, and I'm trying to learn that. So one of the things I want to start off with this afternoon, morning, evening, just don't know, time, is feedback. So, you don't have to send me any, but as a professor, one of the things I really appreciate in a classroom setting is being able to hand out note cards and telling my students to say, hey, what's working for you, what isn't, so I can make adjustments. And I want to keep that kind of dialogue together. So if the videos are helpful or unhelpful, or if there's some stuff you want to have covered more, please contact me and let me know with that one. I'm probably going to have to do this particular poem, For Love, in 1 to 2 videos. I don't think it'll take me 3, so this will be a little bit longer, and I hope that it's engaging enough that you can kind of follow me and follow along with me. So what we want to do here is I'm going to share my screen with you, bring this up. And then I'll briefly just make one other point about the grading of the response journals. I'm finishing them as they come in, so I have not finished with all of them, but I will by the end of the evening and in the early morning. So some of my comments are kind of directed toward what I'm seeing in there, and some of them are going to be just sort of separate. So before I begin looking at this, For Love by Robert Creeley, remember, we're thinking about line and image. Remember, image is over here, right? And abstraction is over here. Pretty good definitions of abstraction so far. I like that. So imagery, remember, deals with our sensory experience. It's something that's tangible in the universe that we can touch or taste or be a part of in some sort of physical way. And over here is abstraction, which is not that. It's an idea. It's a concept. So it's going to be, I saw the word vague show up a lot inside of these responses, and I think that's a pretty good word for these. They're a little bit vague, but it's a bit of a tricky idea, right? They're not necessarily, they don't feel vague. How about that? They're tricky in that way, because when I look at this poem here, For Love by Robert Creeley, I don't necessarily feel confused by the word love. I don't feel vague. I feel, though, that there is an immediate response that comes from me, but it may not be the same one that they have. So there's probably a word that we could work at. Maybe we could think about that together in this video or in the prompt later about what's weirdly, it's sort of ironic, but what's a more specific word for vague, right? What can we do to get that down to a very precise experience? So I'm going to think about that too, because that's a great teaching tactic for me. That's what matters about teaching. It's me. One of the things I want to point out before I get started here, right, is that remember, okay, this is a line, okay? Just what I've highlighted is a line, and that this here is a sentence. So remember that they're not necessarily the same thing, though they can be. A line can be a sentence can be a line, but in this case, I have a sentence that covers here 6 different lines. The other thing to remember here, okay, this is a stanza. This is 4 lines. We call that a quatrain, but we're going to just know this is a 4-line stanza, as is this one. And in fact, the sentence here, right, it goes over the stanza. Right here, I can't highlight it, but the white space between these 2 stanzas, we call a stanza break, all right? That means that we're breaking from one stanza to the next. Just as here at the end of this line, at the end of the word to, when it goes down to the word speak, here we have what we call a line break, meaning that that's where the line breaks and it starts a new line on the left-hand margin. So again, the white space here, stanza break, the space here, line break. And we can talk about these as sort of critical attention, like what do they do? What do they do for us and how can we understand them? And remember, so imagery, abstraction, line, sentence, stanza. These are some of the languages we want to understand, some of the words of the language of poetry we want to be familiar with. So one thing I like to do before I read any kind of a poem, especially if it's new to me, this one isn't. I've read this poem many, many times. But one of the things I always like to do before I really start is I like to scroll through it and kind of see what it looks like. I like to look at the physical structure of a poem because that really matters, right? You start recognizing what a poem looks like. And that's just I don't really know how to describe that, but I think it gives me a sense, like an overview of it, right? It's like when you get a book for a class and you flip through it to see, like, are there pictures, right? It's just like, it's an immediate response to this to understand it better. I'm sorry that my jokes aren't good. I want to clarify that too. That's just what life is. What I see though right here is interesting because I see a couple of things that are uniform. I see that there are 4-line stanzas each and every time. So I have this idea, and what I'm going to write down over here in my notes is this idea of uniform, right? Meaning that everything matches, but I'm going to put a question mark next to that because that can be a critical observation. Right now, it's just a general observation. They all look the same, relatively speaking. So I'm wondering if there's something about this poem that's dealing with the idea of uniformity or things that seem like they all belong together. Like, what's the point of having such a structure in here? Because he could have chosen any number of lines or done anything with anything, but he did 4, and that's interesting to me. I also notice here that most of the lines are relatively close, right? None of them are particularly long, right? They're all pretty short, but they're not uniform, though they seem to really kind of be somewhat similar in length. So there's some variety, right? Some variation. I'm going to write that down as well. And now I'm looking at 2 things. I'm looking at what is uniform and what is varied. So I don't know where that's going to fit into the discussion, right? If I start writing about this one, but it's the first thing that I've noticed. I want to pay attention to that as we go forward. And a couple of other things jump out at me. I see this parenthetical right here that kind of pops out at me. I don't really see a whole lot of parentheticals in the poem. In fact, that's the only one. So I kind of want to pay attention to that. I see that there is what we call so this is a dedication, right, for Bobby. It would take me a little bit of research to find out that this was Robert Creeley's wife, okay, just to kind of know that. Does that help me? Maybe, maybe not, but it's nice to know it so it doesn't just feel like it's vaguely put there inside of this particular space. I see that there are, I have an ellipses here. I see commas, so I know that the poem is dealing with a grammatical structure, not necessarily. Maybe it's correct grammar. Maybe he's playful with grammar, but he is using a sentence format, which is nice to know. That means there is, again, some sense of control, right? Some sense of following rules. That's what sentence structure does. Not all poets do that, right? Some poets don't use commas. E. Cummings, who I think a lot of people know in some regard, he was sort of notorious for moving away from traditional grammar. He wanted to play with the way a sentence looked on the page. Or really what a sentence is. And Creeley doesn't seem to be doing that. He might, right, as I read through it, and they may not sound like sentences I'm familiar with, but he's still utilizing sentence structure that I'm familiar with when I look at the poem. So this is all kind of working for me. I'm going to start at the top of this one, and I'm going to read the poem. And if that's something you don't want in these videos, that's great. Then ask me not to. But I do think there's a real nice ability to hear poetry because it is meant to be heard. And spoken. So I'll read the poem, and then from there I'll try to start thinking about line, image abstraction, and sentence, and try to see what can I take from this as an example of a close reading. So this is For Love by Robert Creeley. Yesterday I wanted to speak of it, that sense above the others to me important, because all that I know derives from what it teaches me. Today, what is it that is finally so helpless, different? Despairs of its own statement, wants to turn away, endlessly to turn away. If the moon did not, no, if you did not, I wouldn't either, but what would I not do? What prevention, what thing so quickly stopped? That is love yesterday or tomorrow, not now. Can I eat what you give me? I have not earned it. Must I think of everything as earned? Now love also becomes a reward so remote from me I have only made it with my mind. Here is tedium, despair, a painful sense of isolation and whimsical if pompous self-regard. But that image is only of the mind's vague structure, vague to me because it is my own. Love, what do I think to say? I cannot say it. What have you become to ask? What have I made you into? Companion, good company, crossed legs with skirt or soft body under the bones of the bed. Nothing says anything but that which it wishes would come true. Fears what else might happen in some other place, some other time, not this one. A voice in my place, an echo of that only in yours. Let me stumble into not the confession, but the obsession I begin with now. For you, also, some time beyond place or place beyond time, no mind left to say anything at all. That face gone now, into the company of love, it all returns. To be fair, I think this is just a very lovely and beautiful poem. I think there's some moments in here that we can kind of break down. I'm going to stop this particular video here as sort of part one for Creeley, and then I'll start the next one shortly where we kind of go into it with a little bit more depth. So thank you. Remember, feedback if you would like, and that's about the end of this one.